When my uncle called, it threw me. We hadn't spoken in years. Ray was never sentimental, not the sort to say he missed you or ask you to visit. But this time, beneath the flatness of his voice, there was something heavy, a drag between the words. He didn't say, "Come home." He didn't need to. His name was Raymond, though everyone in Grafton just called him Ray. A quiet man, a woodworker who lived alone on the edge of town after my aunt died. He never remarried, never left. He built things, fixed things, and let the years move around him like weather. I was his only living family, and now he was dying. So I drove back to Grafton, a town so small you have to pinch and zoom extra on Google Maps to find it. Once it gets hold of you, it doesn't really let go. I thought it would feel strange after 10 years, but everything was exactly where I'd left it. The rusted grain silos, the one bar that had somehow accumulated 3 different names on the sign, the same curled paper taped to the church door announcing potlucks that had happened weeks ago. Ray was thinner than I remembered, hands shakier, but his eyes were sharp. When I hugged him, he held on a little too long. The word cancer hung unsaid between us, metallic and sour. Neither of us spoke it. We didn't need to. From the look of him, from the way he moved, it was obvious this visit had an ending built in. He didn't have much time. On the second morning, just before dawn, he woke me with a thermos of black coffee and said, "It's the day." I knew what that meant. Hollow Lake sits just beyond the tree line east of town. Grafton was literally built around it. The first settlers stopped there because the lake never ran dry, even when everything else did. When upstream rivers shrank to threads of dust, Hollow Lake held a cold, mirrored circle in the woods, clear, deep, inexhaustible. Except every 7 years, it disappears. One day it's full, the next it's gone. No trickle, no slow recession, just emptied, as if someone pulled a plug at the bottom. People studied it. They drilled, mapped, measured. The ground beneath it didn't make sense, geologically wrong, structurally impossible. A hollow that shouldn't be able to hold that kind of depth without collapsing, and yet somehow did. And because the lake always came back exactly 4 days later, every time, the town eventually stopped trying to explain it. They gave it a name, the Hollowing, said it like they were talking about a storm front. Ray had seen it happen 5 times. He always went alone. This time, he said he didn't want to. We parked at the Overlook Ridge before sunrise. I sat in the passenger seat, shivering under the quilt he kept folded behind the truck's bench. He sipped from his thermos, staring out over the dark tree line. The sun came up slow, fat, and red. I expected to see mist over the water, frost clinging to the branches. Instead, when the light cleared the trees, Hollow Lake was already gone. It didn't look dry. It looked scoured. The basin was a pale, fractured expanse that seemed wrong for a lake bed, too smooth in some places, too sharply broken in others. A wound rather than an absence, and in the exact center, maybe 50 yards from what used to be the shore, something new. At first, I thought it was stone, a perfect circle cut into the earth, edges clean and hard. Then the early light caught the rim, and I saw that it sank downward, Not a pit, a spiral. A staircase bored into the ground, curving into darkness. No railings, no moss, no sign of construction. Just bare, dry stone, worn smooth, corkscrewing into the earth. My stomach rolled. Ray gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles blanched. He stared at the spiral and didn't blink. It's never left anything behind before, I said. He shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on that dark opening. We sat there a long time, saying nothing. The silence between us stretched across the empty basin like another horizon. His breath whistled shallowly through his nose. For a moment, I thought he might be crying. But when he finally turned, his face was dry, just hollowed out in a way I'd never seen before. "I never told you," he said. "I used to come here every cycle, even when I said I wouldn't, even when it scared me." "Why?" He turned back toward the staircase. The wind shifted, and for a second, I thought I smelled something drifting up from that impossible mouth. Old air, stale and patient. "Because I thought maybe one day it would show me something," he said. "And now I think it finally will." We didn't talk much on the drive home. Ray seemed far away, his attention snagged on some invisible line that ran back toward the drained lake. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not like he was afraid of something following us, but like he was hoping. Back at the house, he made tea, settled in his old chair, and stared through the window until his eyelids sagged. I didn't press him. He looked, for the first time since I'd arrived, peaceful. I slept harder than I meant to that night. Travel fatigue, thin mountain air, and a thick, insulating quiet that filled Ray's house and padded every sound. By the time I finally woke, it was nearly noon. Sunlight sliced clean rectangles across the kitchen floor. The place felt empty in a way it hadn't before. "Ray," I called. No answer. I checked the workshop, the shed. The truck was gone. On the kitchen table sat two things: an envelope with my name on it and a leather-bound journal, cracked down the spine, heavy with the weight of decades of smoke and sweat and time. The note was brief, his handwriting small and hurried. "I think this is my last chance. Don't follow unless it calls you. But if it does, read this first." Ray, the back door was unlocked. His coat was gone, and with it, I assumed, his keys. I sat down, opened the journal, and began to read. He'd been keeping it for over 30 years, always writing after each hollowing. The entries were jagged and uneven, some half-finished, others violently crossed out, whole pages torn away. But patterns emerged, sketches of the empty lakebed, measurements of the basin's depth, lists of people who'd gone missing during past hollowings, and a single word, scribbled in the margins again and again, circled, underlined, obsessed over. Wrath for beneath it, in one cramped note, he'd written, "A wound that doesn't bleed Ray hadn't just been visiting the lake. He'd been waiting for it. For what? I still didn't know. Grief hadn't landed yet. Not really. It sat in me as a kind of borderless ache. I wanted to respect his choice. If this was how he meant to go, swallowed by the place that had devoured his attention for half his life. But the journal felt like an unfinished sentence he'd left in my hands. I couldn't just leave it closed. so I started asking around. Most people looked at me like I was trying to stir up a superstition everyone had agreed to bury. The only one who didn't was Lester, the wiry old man who ran the bait shop by the railway tracks. He smelled of old leather and menthol cigarettes, a permanent haze of both lingering on his clothes. When I mentioned Ray and the hollowing, he poured 2 bourbons. I saw it once, he said after he'd finished his second. The stairwell, I was a boy, thought it was a sinkhole till I saw someone walking down in a hurry. Who? He shook his head. No one you'd know. No one we ever saw again. I mentioned the word Rathfor. His hand froze midway through another pour. Where'd you hear that? He asked. Ray's journal. His face tightened, lines etching deeper. My grandfather used that word, Lester said quietly. Said it was older than English. Not Latin either. Thought maybe it came from one of the tribes around here, but he never could trace it. He said the ground there isn't land. It's a scab. He took a slow breath. He told me it translates to a wound that doesn't bleed. But what it truly means, that's a different matter. What did he find? I asked. Lester tapped a finger against his temple. Never said, but he came back different, like something was missing, or something extra had been crammed in where it didn't belong. He stared at his glass. We stopped letting him babysit after that, he added, half to himself. I pressed him gently, then harder, but he shut down, shoulders nodding. If you're serious about this, he muttered at last, check the church basement. That's where they kept records on the ones who came back wrong. I didn't want to believe him, but curiosity, guilt, and grief pull stronger than reason when you're unmoored. That night, I went to the church. I didn't expect the side door to be unlocked. It was. The basement smelled of mildew and old candle wax, heavy and stale. Behind the water heater, an ancient storage cabinet sat padlocked and forgotten. I broke the lock. Inside, boxes were stacked like cardboard gravestones. Brittle folders, dust-choked ledgers, hand-drawn maps of the town, and lists, dozens of them, names of residents from each hollowing cycle, annotated with dates and terse notes in the margins. Rejected, sent away, uninvited. There were photographs, too, faded Polaroids, and older black and white group shots. One picture stopped me cold. A crowd of townsfolk standing at the lake's edge, backs to the camera, hands linked, heads bowed like they were at a funeral. Just within the frame, barely more than a blur, was the edge of a spiral stair already there, already waiting. A thin, sickly figure walked toward it. I tried to leave it alone after that. I really did. Ray had made his choice. He left the journal, left the note. It should have been enough. His death, on his terms, in the place that had haunted him, his perfect ending. For 2 days, I stayed in his house. I chopped wood, boiled coffee I never drank, read the same line in a book a dozen times without absorbing a word. I folded his clothes just to keep my hands busy. Silence doesn't scream when you're grieving. It just accumulates, layer by layer, until it's heavy enough to push you somewhere you swore you wouldn't go. At night, I woke certain I'd heard footsteps on the porch soft, fading before I reached the window. Once, I could have sworn I saw the outline of the truck in the drive, there, and then gone when I blinked. The journal stayed on the kitchen table, impossible not to notice. It was full of half-formed thoughts and frantic diagrams, dates and names, some crossed out, some circled. In one margin, in near torn through ink, he'd written, "It only opens for the broken." Broken was underlined so hard the page had ripped. Why had he left it for me? Why insist on dragging me to the lake before he went? What about this was something he thought I needed to understand? I hadn't grown up broken. Not really. No great trauma, no singular catastrophe. My life had been ordinary in a quiet way. College, a move, a job that never turned into much. I hadn't blossomed, but I hadn't shattered either. I just drifted. Was that not enough? Eventually, I stopped pretending I'd stay put. I packed a small bag, slid the journal inside, locked Ray's door out of habit, though no one in Grafton really locks anything, and drove back to the lake. The sky was overcast. In that light, the empty basin looked flatter, painted on instead of carved out. At its center, the dark spiral yawned, patient. Up close, the structure didn't look ancient or man-made. It looked like the earth itself had decided to open. I walked to the edge. The stairs coiled downward farther than I could see, tight and neat, like the threads of a drill bit turning slowly into the ground. I dropped a small stone. Never heard it land. The stone itself smelled faintly of damp metal, like wet copper. No moss, no moisture clung to the steps. Yet the treads were worn, smoothed by countless feet, always moving in the same direction. You're not the only one who hears it. I turned. A woman stood a few yards away. Mid-40s, maybe. Scuffed boots. Hair pulled back with a red, hand-knitted scarf. She didn't look like a local, but she didn't look lost either. More like someone who'd taken a long detour and finally wandered back to where she'd meant to be. "Sorry," I said. She stepped closer, gaze flicking from my face to the spiral. The lake, the timing, the pull, her voice was calm. "You feel it too, don't you?" Her name was Grace. She'd grown up near here, in some satellite town that had since been swallowed into Grafton's vague sprawl. Left at 17, married and divorced somewhere else. A few dead ends along the way. The dreams started 6 weeks ago, she said. Every night, same thing. A dried out lake, a spiral in the earth. Someone waiting at the bottom. Someone I used to know calling me. She looked out over the empty basin, as if trying to align this place with the one in her sleep. "Do you think it's real?" I asked. "I think the land remembers who we are," she said, "and sometimes it calls in the debt." Before I could ask more, she walked toward the stairwell. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She didn't move like someone in a trance. She moved like someone who'd made up her mind. "Wait," I said. "You're just going in." She glanced back at me and smiled a small, almost gentle smile. "Isn't that why you're here?" Then she stepped down onto the first stair, then the next. Within a few seconds, the curve of the spiral hid her from view. I stood at the rim, caught between two instincts, run or follow. Ray had gone in. Grace had gone in. I told myself I'd just descend a little, far enough to see what they'd seen. It felt less terrifying if I wasn't the only one down there. So I followed. The air changed after the sixth step. I'd meant to go only far enough to catch up to Grace, to see what she was heading toward. But after the first few full turns, distance became slippery. The spiral tightened. Each step was solid beneath my boots, worn but seamless. The stone was one unbroken skin. I called her name once. My voice didn't echo. It didn't trail off. It simply stopped, cut short a few feet from my lips. Grace didn't answer. I kept descending. My own footsteps boomed inside my head, but when I paused, the silence was absolute. I couldn't hear Grace at all. It felt like she'd passed into another layer of the world, just out of reach. I moved faster. The walls began to change. Shape pressed faintly out of the stone. At first, I thought it might be symbols, some language etched into the rock, but they weren't letters or runes. They were figures, human forms, some kneeling, some reaching skyward, some bent backward or folded in on themselves in angles that should have broken bones. Heads to feet, limbs doubled, bodies collapsing in postures that could have been worship or agony. Were they praying to something, or were they being reshaped into prayer? I kept going. Eventually, the stairs emptied into a landing, the first flat ground since I'd entered. A wide chamber with a ceiling that vanished into darkness. In its center stood a stone monolith, shoulder height, smooth, slightly tapering at the top. Untooled, unadorned, except for the handprints. Hundreds of them, ghostly and overlapping. Some faint as fossils, others dark and recent, all pressed into the stone like clay that had hardened. I laid my palm over one. The rock was warm. Nothing happened. No shock, no vision. Just my hand against that strange, gently pulsing warmth. But as I traced some of the newer imprints, I felt a flicker of recognition that made my skin prickle. Two of the fresher handprints felt familiar. Not in any logical sense. I couldn't know them. But as I stared at the size, the spread of the fingers, the slight angle of the palms, the sensation was like looking someone in the eyes. Ray, Grace. That was the moment something in me decided I wanted out. Not out of fear, at least not only fear, but out of the sense that I was intruding on something that had waited too long and too patiently to be understood. I turned back toward the stairs. Grace stood 3 steps up, just beyond my reach. Her eyes were calm, her expression unreadable. "I didn't hear you come down," I said. "I was already here," she replied. "How far did you go?" She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to a frequency I couldn't catch. "Did it show you yours yet?" she asked. I don't think so." A small, sad smile touched her mouth. "Then you're not done." Without waiting, she turned and walked deeper into the dark. I followed. We descended in silence for what felt like hours. The air grew thinner, colder, not in any natural way, but like we were moving into a place that didn't believe in warmth. The stone under my feet began to hum faintly, a muscle twitching far beneath the surface. Grace walked without a flashlight, her bare arms never goosebumped. She didn't stumble once. "How far does this go?" I asked. "Far enough," she said. "The further we went, the less sense the architecture made." angles folded inward, then outward, in ways my eyes couldn't quite track. Once I looked back and realized I couldn't recognize the path we'd taken. Not because of the dark, but because the coil of stairs behind us had shifted. The spiral was the same shape, and yet different. Gravity still held me, but my balance fought me. When I leaned left, I felt my weight slide minutely right, as if some other logic was arguing with physics. Grace kept moving. Sometimes she murmured under her breath, not to herself exactly, but not to me either. I caught fragments. It's not pain they want. It's the shape pain leaves. They can't open what's sealed, but they can wait for the cracks. She said these things with the quiet certainty of someone reciting a memory, not a theory, and the way she glanced at me sometimes, as if I were the answer to a question I didn't know she'd asked, left a cold knot in my gut. "You've been here before," she said suddenly. "No," I told her. "This is the first time I've ever seen it." She smiled with a sad sort of patience. "You're walking ahead of me," I said. "It's the only way I know where to go." "Deep down, you know where to go," she replied. "You're just nervous." That wasn't true. Without her, I was already hopelessly disoriented. The only reason I knew which way was down was because that's where she led. But I didn't correct her. I didn't say that I didn't belong here, that I was only chasing someone else's goodbye. I didn't understand what this place was, why it opened, or why people kept vanishing into it. I only knew that I had to see it. Curiosity is its own kind of hunger, and I was starving. The temperature dropped until cold no longer felt like weather, but like judgment. Then the spiral spilled us out into a chamber, so vast it made my stomach lurch. I couldn't tell if it had been carved, or if the earth had simply been removed from around it. It felt wrong in scale, like someone had scooped out a piece of the world without permission. The space breathed quietly, a long-held inhale. Below us, sunken in the center of the chamber, were shapes. Dozens, maybe more. Pale, folded things clustered together. Each one the rough outline of a human body curled in on itself. They shifted ever so slightly, not with individual movement, but as if some current moved through them all at once. Like wind over wheat. Like a field of moths caught mid-dream. I didn't ask Grace what they were. I already knew. At the far end of the basin loomed something else. Not exactly an altar, not exactly a statue, but occupying the role of both. It pulsed slow and steady, like a sleeping lung. Its surface was mostly stone, but it flexed like muscle sat under shallow water. Portions of it drew inward and then unfurled again. It wasn't alive in any way I understood. It also wasn't dead. It was waiting. Grace didn't hesitate. She walked down into the basin as if she'd finally found home. Her shoulders relaxed. Her hands opened at her sides. She stepped up to the thing and stood before it. She didn't kneel, didn't bow. She simply whispered, "I'm ready." The altar answered without sound. I felt it, a vibration that ran through the stone and into my bones like a struck tuning fork. Grace rose slightly onto the balls of her feet. Then she began to come apart. It wasn't violent. It didn't look painful. Her skin unfurled from her body like paper curling in heat. Her clothes dissolved with it, threads and fabric merging into pale bands that wrapped around her. All color drained away until she was white, nearly translucent. No blood, no scream. Her face was wet with tears, but she smiled. Whatever this was, it was stripping something from her pain or the memory of it. The relief radiating from her was almost tangible. She folded slowly, knees drawing up, arms curling around them. Layer by layer, a husk wrapped her, like skin replacing itself as a shell. Her voice reached me through the thickening cocoon. "This is what I wanted," she said. "This is what I needed to become. Relief, salvation, the size of your pain." She looked at me. I stood frozen at the lip of the basin, every instinct in my body firing signals to run, to move, to do something. But nothing touched me. No pull, no warmth, no answering pulse from the altar. The chamber stilled. The presence quieted. My skin stayed mine. My breath came in ragged clouds. It hit me with a strange, humiliating clarity. I hadn't been chosen. The place had no interest in me. I hadn't been invited. Grace's smile faltered. Her face, nearly fully cocooned, peered out one last time. Horror crept across her features as the last remnants of her hand dissolved. "You weren't marked," she whispered. I took an involuntary step toward her. She flinched back, not from fear of me, but from shock. She reached, a faint, reflexive gesture I didn't understand until she spoke again, voice fraying at the edges. "You need to get out," she said. "Only those chosen are safe." Then the husk sealed over her. The chamber dimmed. For a moment, there was nothing but the thudding of my own heart. Then the altar pulsed once. A ripple shuddered through the floor. The walls trembled, subtly at first, as if the entire structure were stretching awake. And then I heard it. Water, somewhere far above, pitching against stone. A distant rush, moving fast. The lake was refilling. I had no idea how long that took. Minutes, seconds. All I knew was that the sound grew louder with every breath. A cold draft pushed down from above, carrying the dark, familiar scent of hollow, like wet earth, deep water, and something that remembered being old. I ran. The staircase shifted under my boots. Steps stretched, then snapped short. Landings twisted into the wall and vanished. Doorways surfaced, then sealed like closing mouths. The whole place felt alive now, awake and not pleased. As I climbed, the walls boiled with shapes. Scenes pushed outward in relief, slick and detailed. At first, they were benign, a toy gun, the exact plastic model I'd gotten on my 9th birthday. Seeing it there jolted the memory loose. Only a handful of kids had shown up, and I'd pretended not to care. Then a car wheel, half embedded in the stone. I remembered my dad showing me how to change a tire, how I dropped the iron and sprained my wrist. The place was rifling through my mind, looking for something fractured, some deep crack to slip into. It wanted pain to work with. It wanted a wound it could cradle and reshape. It found small hurts, embarrassments, mild regrets, nothing big enough, so it tried to make one. A new scene bulged from the rock beside me, me at 12, standing on the shore of Hollow Lake with Ray. Only in this version, he walked into the water alone. I watched, motionless, as he waded out, stumbled, disappeared. Did nothing as he failed to surface. The memory was false. It had never happened, but my chest clenched with the weight of it, with the sudden, dense guilt of having let him drown. The thought looped hard and fast in my skull. You should have saved him. This is your fault. Nausea slapped through me. I stumbled, caught myself, kept climbing. More memories slammed into being, crowding the walls. A bitter divorce I'd never had. An empty house after a beloved dog died. A dog I'd never owned. A late-night hospital hallway. A doctor shaking their head about someone who'd never existed. They hurt. That was the worst part. They hurt like they were mine. Hooks thrown again and again. Barbs digging for anything tender enough to tear away and offer to whatever waited below. For a moment, my own skin felt foreign, like something that could just slide off if I let go. The stairs bucked. Water crashed down in the dark above, cold spray licking my ankles. Panic clawed at my ribs. The spiral warped, twisting in on itself, until I wasn't sure if I was going up or just running in tighter and tighter circles. And then I saw him. Ray stood on a landing above me. A pale glow clung to him, light with no source. His edges were translucent, his features softening, like something only half believing in its own shape. He smiled the way he used to, small and wry. "You came anyway," he said. "Always were too curious." My throat locked. "Ray, did you?" He lifted a hand, not to hush me, but to steady me. "I'm all right," he said. "I went where I needed to. I was ready." The structure groaned around us. Water thundered closer, roaring down the spiral. "You're not," he added. "You've still got good time in you. That's not a punishment." He reached for me. When our hands met, the stairs stopped writhing. The walls smoothed. The false memories shattered, crumbling into dust that the air didn't bother to carry. For one clear second, everything felt real again. Solid, ordinary, in the way only the safe world can. I understood then. Whatever part of him remained in this place, Ray was burning it up to give me a way out. He was anchoring me at the cost of whatever waited for him below. He squeezed my hand once, a goodbye more than words could hold. Then he turned me upward. "Go," he said. The water surged, tearing into the chamber below us. I scrambled up the last coil, his presence fading like warmth from a cooling stone. I climbed the final stretch alone, but I didn't feel alone. By the time the first wave smashed against my back, the stairs were nearly gone. I climbed until there was no more staircase, only one last stone lip beneath me and black, surging water above. I pushed off and swam. The water thickened quickly, weighty with the pressure of all that depth coiling underneath. It pulled at my legs like a hand, like the whole spiral had decided I was worth keeping after all. My lungs burned. My arms went numb. For a second, I was sure I wouldn't make it, that I'd feel the water close over my head one final time. Then I broke the surface. I came up with a sound that tore my throat raw, part scream, part desperate inhalation. The lake around me was almost full, dark water rising to swallow the last unseen inches of what had been the stairwell. The stone rim was gone, buried. To any watching eye, it was just a lake again. I swam, clumsy and shaking, until my flailing hands found stones. I dragged myself onto the shore and collapsed on the cold, gritty bank. The air bit at my wet skin, sharp and thin. It felt like the kind of cold that proves you survived something you weren't meant to. Mist drifted low over the water. Above me, the sky had gone a soft, indifferent gray. Behind me, Hollow Lake lay still and complete, its surface calm as glass. It looked like nothing had ever happened. I watched it for a long time, waiting for a ripple, a shift, some acknowledgement. Nothing came, just quiet water holding the sky in its bowl. When I finally pushed myself upright, coughing lake water and streaks of red into my palms, I felt something heavy tug at the strap of my pack. I fumbled it open. Ray's old army jacket lay inside, worn at the cuffs, collar frayed. I had no memory of packing it. My hands shook as I slid them into the inner pocket. Folded between the lining and the fabric was a photograph, edges cracked and faded. Me, maybe 9 years old, front teeth missing, grin too wide. Ray beside me, one arm slung around my shoulders, the other half covering the camera with a peace sign. There was writing on the back in his hand. You weren't broken, so live. I didn't cry. I just sat there while the wind skimmed over the lake, letting the weight of the words settle into the spaces the place below hadn't been able to find. I was still here. Weeks passed before I trusted my legs not to wobble under me. I stayed in Grafton to manage Ray's affairs, sorting his tools, boxing his books, meeting with the lawyer about the cabin. Routine wrapped itself around me like a thin blanket. Not warm, but something. I kept expecting to hear him in the other room. A cough, the scrape of a chair. Habit lingers long after its source is gone. The lake returned to its regular life. The town did too. Hollow Lake lay smooth and clear, shallow stones visible through the water near the shore. No one spoke about the spiral. No one asked if I'd seen anything, or if they had seen it. They'd perfected the small town's skill of silence, ignoring the things that didn't fit, the way you ignore a stray dog until it finds a different porch. People nodded when they passed me on Main, asked if I'd be staying long, then changed the subject before I answered. Sometimes I thought they sensed something different in me and didn't want to name it. Or maybe they were always like that, and I was only now noticing. One evening, I wandered down to Lester's bait shop. He saw me through the small, grimy window and had a drink waiting by the time I stepped inside. He didn't ask where I'd been, didn't mention Ray, didn't say a word about the lake. That, too, was a kind of courtesy. I turned the glass in my hands, watching the amber catch the light. Lester, I said, you told me about the ones who came back wrong. You ever know someone who came back right? He studied the bottom of his drink as if the answer might be written there. Once, he said finally. Long time ago. What happened to them? He shrugged. Didn't say much, but he never tried to go back. I waited for more, but he seemed to consider that enough. Somehow, it was. a thin thread of possibility that not everyone who touched that place ended up hollowed. When I left the shop, the sky was turning amber. Late autumn had crept in while I wasn't looking, cold riding low in the air, the kind that feels like an epilogue. I walked to the lake. The surface was perfectly still. If there was anything beneath it, if it remembered me, remembered Ray, remembered Grace, it kept its secrets. I didn't talk to it, didn't ask it questions I knew it would never answer. I just watched the reflection of the dimming sky on the water and felt something in my chest ease, the faintest shift from rawness toward something else. As I turned to go, a thought surfaced, quiet and unforced. It never opened for me. Maybe that means I still have something left to give. For the first time since I'd set foot on that first stone step, the thought didn't hurt. It felt like hope.